Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We always have to wait 10 seconds before before actually speaking, which is why we awkwardly just sort of wait there. My name is Zehra Rizvi. I wanted to welcome everybody to this webinar. One of the things that we do to start off the webinar is that we launch a poll, which is what I'm going to do right now. And it's to be able to get an idea if you are a social protection actor, a humanitarian actor, both, or neither. And we do this just to be able to give us an idea, and I'll leave the poll on for about 30 seconds or so. We do this to give ourselves an idea, especially for the wonderful panelists that we have logged on today for this webinar, who the audience is. In the previous webinars that we've done, we've had a pretty even mix of social protection and humanitarian actors, which has been wonderful. Because one of the big things about this webinar series that we have on linking social protection and humanitarian cash is to bring together the different sets of actors as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give everybody another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds and close the poll, and we can share the results. So you can see that as of right now, oh, great. We've got quite a big mix of people coming in with that mixed profile of being both social protection or self-identifying as being on the social protection side and the humanitarian side. So I will go ahead and get started. I have already introduced myself as the facilitator. I'm Zehra Rizvi. I work in the space of social protection and cash coming from, and humanitarian cash coming from the humanitarian side. I'm going to start very much with just very quickly giving you an overview about the webinar and the Grand Bargain Cash Workstream subgroup. At the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, social protection had emerged as one of the ways to help strengthen the humanitarian and development nexus by addressing underlying poverty and vulnerability, as well as by supporting localization of humanitarian action. A subgroup was formed on linking social protection with humanitarian cash, and this was about a year ago as part of the overall Grand Bargain Cash workstream to further the Grand Bargain commitments. This group is co-led, and you can see the logos on the bottom. It is co-led by UNICEF, the International Federation of the Red Cross, and DFID. The overall objective of this subgroup is to equip humanitarian actors with knowledge to better consider the linkages between cash voucher assistance and social protection. The need for better dialogue and knowledge sharing across the humanitarian and development stakeholders emerged as one of the key areas of work for the subgroup. As a co-lead of the Grand Bargain subgroup on linking social protection and humanitarian cash, always that mouthful coming through, UNICEF has been the one that is leading the process for knowledge management. And one of the ways in which that they are doing this is organizing this webinar series. And we also have some discussion threads that people who are part of the CALP, the Cash Learning Partnership D groups have been able to see those discussion threads. The topics that we have been looking at are based on, we had done a needs assessment at the beginning in terms of, what are the topics that people are not aware of or need more knowledge on, humanitarian actors specifically. So those are the sorts of topics that we are putting forward. We are so incredibly pleased this time for our 4th webinar to be co-hosting this with the Collaborative Cash Delivery Network, the CCD. You will hear more about the CCD, but it is basically a network of 15 INGOs, NGOs who are working in cash delivery and looking at collaborative ways of being able to do that. The objectives, also we've got our social media up there for people to take a look at, and so use those hashtags. And we can, the hashtags are over there for those who are inclined in, are big users of social media. For the next slide, we're going to talk about the objectives of the webinar. And the objectives are looking at ways in which a social protection system can be leveraged in humanitarian settings. We're going to explore what role humanitarian stakeholders can play in supporting and strengthening the system. And the focus for this webinar is on INGOs and NGOs. We're also going to take a look at, in a complex emergency where you've got multiple actors and donors, who's best placed to do what and why, and where are those spaces to engage differently and look at what are the ways in which to engage in those spaces. What are the different ways in which to engage in those spaces. We are also, because we are looking at conflict settings, we're also going to consider how humanitarian principles have been balanced in these situations. Our speakers will be addressing these objectives through case study presentations, which have been structured around these key questions of relevance to humanitarian practitioners. I'm going to do a very quick introduction, and we have Mohammed, who is the Protection Technical Coordinator. Amar, if you can just wave so that we can see, there he is. Amar is in Yemen. Thank you for changing the slide like that. He is the Protection Technical Coordinator for Oxfam in Yemen. We have Aneel Memon, who is the Head of Department for Food Security and Livelihoods for Action Against Hunger in Nigeria. Aneel, if you can, yep, there we go. So these are the two people we were able to get on video. We also have from Action Against Hunger, also in Nigeria, Mr. Abdulrahman Sani, and he is the Social Protection Sector Manager. We also have on the webinar with us as a discussant, Larissa Pelham. She is the Social Protection Advisor for the Oxfam Global Humanitarian Team, but she is also the focal point for the Collaborative Cash Delivery Network and their stream on linking social protection and cash. Without further, well, no, there's one more slide that I need to get to. And if we can have the next slide, I just want to sort of, and the one after this, yes, to just give a very quick introduction of what we're looking at and how we have been looking at the webinar series. So this webinar is building on the theory that we presented in the first webinar. It's a great foundational webinar, so I would highly recommend that everybody take a look at it. We did it on December 10th. We'll put the links up in the chat box so that people can take a look at that later. But we're looking at the framework, presenting the different contexts in which humanitarian cash and social protection can be linked. And this we are articulating according to the types of crisis, the level of a social protection system maturity, and looking at how it cuts across different sorts of contexts. So it could be a most fragile context. We could be looking at stable contexts. For this webinar, we're looking specifically at where conflict is present and what that can look like. If I can get the next slide, and with that, I'm also going to hand over to Mohammed from Oxfam and Yemen. Aneel, you and I can come off camera. I would like to also encourage everybody as we are going along, please feel free to ask questions throughout. Everybody will have about 15 minutes to do their presentations. We'll have a 10-minute intervention from Larissa as a discussant, and then we will open it up to questions, but we're very happy to take your questions throughout. And with this, Amar, we will hand over to you to be able to discuss a little bit about Yemen and Oxfam's role in linking social protection and cash.
Thank you, Zehra. Hello, everyone. This is Mohammed, Protection Coordinator for Yemen. So in case study for Yemen, I'm going to talk firstly about the context in Yemen. Then I will start talking about the decision making that we had done in 2011 to work with the Social Welfare Fund here in Yemen. I will talk about the design of this pilot project, then about the outcomes and the challenges that we had faced at that time, including the opportunities for continue working with the social protection system of the country. So next slide, please. So for Yemen, it is the worst humanitarian crisis. The escalation of the conflict in 2015 in March had big impact on the people here in Yemen, where before that also Yemen has long suffered from poverty and instability, leaving it in as the poorest country in the Middle East. So before this current crisis, Yemen ranked 168 out of 188 countries on the Human Development Index. So after this coalition established in 2015, which was still led by the Saudi Arabia, they launched airstrike against the Houthi militias who would take control of the country at that time. Then, now we are entering the 6th year of the conflict in Yemen, which has expected or has, more vulnerabilities now in Yemen due to this conflict. Where also the destruction of civilian infrastructures in schools, health facilities, water, food, local businesses and markets, even some of the attacks were attacking, the buildings related to humanitarian aid agencies here in Yemen. There are a lot of people who have been affected due to this conflict, more than 4 million who have been displaced since March 2015. Also, many people who were injured and killed due to this conflict. So now we have we have a government in the south of Yemen, and we have, in the north of Yemen we have Houthis who are controlling this side of the country. One of the most needed for people in Yemen now is food and also livelihood. There are a lot, more than 24 million people in Yemen who are in need of humanitarian assistance that include food and wash, protection, and other health. So can you please move to the next slide? So for Oxfam, we have been working here in Yemen for almost more than 50 years. We have a good relationship with the government and the authorities in both of the countries, in the south and also in the north. Also with the communities. And in the same time, we have two humanitarian sectors focusing on WASH and FSL. As well, we have gender justice program and protection program. We have been supporting the Yemeni people who were affected from this ongoing conflict. Since 2015, we have reached more than 3 million people through our interventions, water, sanitations, cash, food vouchers, and also protection as well for genders program. Also, we are going to talk now how we have engaged with the social protection in Yemen. Can you please move to the next slide? So, overview of the social protection in Yemen. We have two large national programs. They were funded by the government. The first program is the unconditional cash transfer program, which is through the Social Welfare Fund. It was established since 1969 through the support or through the fund of World Bank, EU, and also other donors. This program still function. However, due to the ongoing conflict in Yemen, there is big impact on this program, and we are going to talk about this program. The second program is the Cash for Work program, which is through the Social Fund for Development. As well, this program is being supported with many donors, including the government of Yemen. Also, we have other programs and services related to social protection with focus, for example, on disability. We have the fund care and rehabilitation of disabled people, and this is one of the most social protection agencies focusing on people with disabilities, which have been affected by the ongoing conflict. And at the same time, there is no donors who are supporting this type or structure of social protection. Can you please move to the second slide? So why Oxfam decided to work with the Social Welfare Fund in 2011? So during that time in Yemen, there was a political crisis related to the Arab Springs, where people, youth were, protesting in the streets and asking to end the rule of the President Ali Abdullah Saleh regime at that time. Then there was a peace after that, but during that time, the security and the political situation in Yemen had big impact on the social protection system. So this is why led to that the donors, they suspended their fund to Yemen and specifically to the Social Welfare Fund. Which had impact on the beneficiaries who used to receive cash support from this social welfare fund. And that at the same time, there was lack of trust among the donors related to this to the work of the social welfare fund. This is why also Oxfam decided to take action and to take the risk and at the same time to work with the Social Welfare Fund. In one of the governorates in Yemen, it was in Hudaydah governorate. There was a food crisis there. So this is why Oxfam decided to work in Hudaydah governorate through the Social Welfare Fund. Can you please move? Next slide. So the design of that pilot project that Oxfam had in Yemen in 2011, we started to work in Al-Hudaydah governorate to provide unconditional cash to the most vulnerable people were facing this food crisis in Al-Hudaydah. Then we expand this project to target Hajjah governorate into districts due to displacement, which was because of the war between the government and Houthis at that time, before 2011. And there was a lot of IDPs in those two locations also who were suffering from food crisis and other also issues. So Oxfam decided to support 500,000 people with this unconditional cash. But at that time, Oxfam, there was no capacity for them to target that large number of people at that time. So we decided to work through the Social Welfare Fund and not to create something new. So we decided to strengthen the social protection system in the country through working with this Social Welfare Fund and to use their beneficiary list. However, we have done a lot of things to ensure that the beneficiary list data is correct and also is updated, because there was a lot of concerns related to this to the list, as well to the methods or to the way that the government used to follow regarding selection of beneficiaries. So we work also. We decided to work through the National Post system as a finance agency to deliver this cash. So we got the beneficiary list from the social welfare fund, and at the same time we work with the national post system to deliver this cash in a speed way for the beneficiaries in the country. So we didn't create anything new. We just supported the existing mechanism that was in the country, and we had a lot of interventions in the same time to like we have established community committees in the districts that we had targeted to do a verification for the beneficiary list that we had got from the social welfare fund, and at the same time we had established a clear complaint mechanism to ensure that people who are excluded from the beneficiary list or who are not there registered with the social welfare fund, they can also raise their concerns in order to see and how we can support. And also we added some people to this list. Can you please move to the next slide? So we gain the acceptance from the local authorities here in the country because we had several meetings with them before we decided to go ahead with this pilot program. And we agreed how we about our methodology and our approach to support the people in Yemen with this unconditional cash support. So we have ensured the sustainability and also the government ownership of this pilot program. Also through our program, there was a lot of intervention related to monitoring and evaluation. So we had this post-distribution monitoring during after each round of cash distribution that we provided to the beneficiaries, and at the same time this data that we had collected from all of these assessments as well from our field visits to during our work, it's had supported our advocacy program to prepare key messages about how they can influence donors and other international humanitarian actors in the country and also outside the country, how they can also support the social protection system in Yemen and follow this approach of distributing cash support for people. Actually, some of the international NGOs they have also started to adapt this methodology after our pilot project, so that had a lot of good outcomes that I can talk about it in the next slide. So the outcomes of our interventions, we have reached 500,000 people with this cash support for food and also for basic needs. We had also through our advocacy messages and influence, we had also bring the attention of the humanitarian actors and also the international world about the situation in Yemen, not just from conflict to hunger, because there was no bigger focus on that areas, and also we succeeded to let other NGOs follow this and adapt this approach, and also some of the donors, they started to trust the social protection system in the country, and this is why also the World Bank resumed their support after 2012. They resumed their support to the social welfare fund through UNICEF. Also, we have improved, one of the outcomes during our implementation for this project. There was some challenges, but we were able to respond immediately to these things like we had difficulties to reaching people, and at the same time because of long distance, but we have agreed with the post office to have these mobile teams and also to go to the people who cannot access the distribution points. Also, we had replicated this pilot project with Oxfam in another country in the region, which is Lebanon. Can you move to the next slide? So when it comes to the challenges that we have faced with the Social Welfare Fund, we had, several challenges that we had faced with the authorities related to the beneficiary list, and in the same time related to the committees that we had established who had done the verification of the list, where we found out that some of the beneficiaries who were in the list, they were not really getting the support. But we have solved this issue, but at the same time, this has created some tension between us and the local authorities. But generally, we had succeeded to convince them about our approach, and in the same time, we had some difficulties with the local authorities staff who were working with the social fund when it comes to signing the code of conduct, as well to keep or to ensure that we are in the same page and that there is no lack of trust. So we also had ensured that there is clear roles and responsibilities for each one. We had some challenges related to referral to the other programs, for example, to the nutrition programs. So one of the lessons learned that we need to ensure that we had good links with other agencies during implementing the cash programs. As well, we had big challenges related to logistic challenges, which related to the areas and the districts that we were targeting. It was big, I mean, geographically, it was very, very difficult to reach to the most vulnerable people. However, we had this mobile team to solve this issue. Can you please move? No, previous slide. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. So for the challenges that we have now currently, that INGOs and other actors who are working with the social protection system in Yemen, there is a lot of challenges that we are facing, because there is big numbers of people who were depending on the social welfare fund support, and due to these suspensions in 2015, and also even if UNICEF now resumed to support, but they are just targeting around 1.5 million people, while we have more than 9 million people who are in need of support and who are registered with the social welfare fund. Also, there are a lot of issues related to the conflict. For example, the government, they are not paying salaries for their employees since 2015, and this also had affected the social protection system in the country. As well, there are a lot of challenges related to the social welfare fund, and also to the how to work with them, because now we have one government in the south, and also we have here another government in the north, and also so coordination between the two conflict parties in the Yemen who are it was also a big challenge. However, UNICEF is still supporting, and there is need to ensure also there is more fund come to Yemen, focusing on strengthening the social protection system, because also what is provided by UNICEF to the social welfare fund is not that much. So, for example, they are receiving the cash each 3 months. So it's not in a monthly basis, it's every 3 months they receive around $20 to $30 for each beneficiary. Also, there are other challenges related to people with disability in Yemen, as the fund, the care and rehabilitation agency is not receiving any support from the donors. Also they had big impact due to lack of fund comes from the government to them. Can you please move to the next slide? So regarding opportunities and the role of NGOs in working with social protection system during humanitarian crisis, also we need to ensure that we are working with the existing social protection system, because this will support and help us also to deliver our cash response at speed and to a large amount of people as well. The cash assistance, will prevent vulnerable people and support them, from practicing negative coping mechanism, as well to improve their access to other basic needs and social services. And when it comes to why we should, for example, work with the social protection system, because this, will also strengthen the social protection system in the country and not creating something new, or we have duplicated, and at the same time, because we need sustainability. So to ensure sustainability in our intervention, we should build on what is there in the country. Next slide. So how Oxfam is still engaging with the Social Welfare Fund? Actually, Oxfam also, because of this pilot project, we had established a cash working group in Yemen, and we were leading this group until recent months. Now there is another NGO is taking over for this working group. And also, after we finished our pilot project in 2015, UNICEF started also, as I said earlier, to support the social welfare fund through the World Bank. So this is why also Oxfam stopped working with the social welfare fund. However, through our cash program that we are delivering to the community since the escalation of the conflict in 2015, the beneficiaries of the social welfare fund, some of them, they also under our beneficiary list in a direct way in the districts that we are working in. So also we are targeting them, but we are not coordinating with the social welfare fund. But we are targeting those people who are receiving support from the social welfare fund, or who are not receiving, but they are in their list. So UNICEF reached total of 1.5 million beneficiaries recently. So now move the next slide, please. So as I talked also previously about the importance of advocacy. So now we need more advocacy interventions to ensure also we are to improve the social protection system in the country, and also to ensure the inclusion of most vulnerable people who are also excluded or who are not supported, like people with disabilities. Now they are one of the most vulnerable people who are excluded from the humanitarian response, and at the same time the social protection system of the government also, it is not functioning like what used to be before the conflict. So they are the most vulnerable people. So we need more efforts from advocacy, and also to bring the attention of the donors to focus on how they can also support social protection system related to people with disabilities, as well to other vulnerable people like children who are orphans. So the residential center and social protection services allocated to them also had big impact because of this conflict, because most of the fund and the donors, the key donors for those residential centers related to orphans, were supported by the Gulf countries before the conflict. But due to the conflict, this fund has been cut, and now some of them, they have closed their interventions. So in general, I think we need to focus more on social protection system in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Amar, so much for that. Really valuable, useful information coming in, really looking at using a list that already existed, looking at a delivery system that already existed, having the ability to pilot, because NGOs, we NGOs tend to be, quite flexible, agile. It can be much easier to be able to pilot things, but also the importance of the government acceptance and ownership. And by being able to pilot something like this, you were able to build also trust in the system. And the role of NGOs, it really struck me how you were talking about the advocacy element, challenges you were having with referrals. We'll be getting into this a lot more. And we've already had a couple of questions coming in, and we will leave those for a little bit later around cash working groups. And of course, that's one of the questions that we will have coming up in a forum like this. What does coordination look like? Is there social protection coordination involved within the cash working groups, etc.? So we'll address those questions as they come along. For right now, what I'm going to do is hand over, and apologies for the time, Aneel and Abdulrahman from Action Against Hunger, presenting for on your experience in Nigeria. But if we can please stick to the time, because we want to make sure we give everybody time for us to actually be able to address the questions and answers coming in. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, and I will hand over to Aneel to start us off.
Yes, thank you, Zehra, for the opportunity. So just waiting for the slide. Yes, it's come. So actually, we are actually going to present a case study from the Nigeria, and it has the introduction is already conducted. So actually, we have been doing some programs on social protections since 2017 in Nigeria. So we would like to have to share some things related to social protection. So I am going to present a case study of one of our project, which is we can say the Sani project. It is funded by actually the from DFED. So can you please just change the slide? And we have been actually, we will be discussing all the context, the challenges, the opportunity, and the technical design of the project, and what are the opportunities and what is the takeaway in this presentation. So just to request, can you please, yes, so it's a change. So specific in the context, if we discuss about the Nigeria, so Nigeria is, located in the West Africa, and country is facing a sort of poverty from since decades. So about some 91 million of the people, who are living under the poverty. And especially if we see the northern part of the countries, they are more vulnerable, and the poverty is more precious, say in the northern part of the country in the Nigeria. And the work, especially where we are working, so especially in the base states, in the context of northeast Nigeria, so it has been almost 11 years of insurgency in the base states, and we have been working in northeast Nigeria like Borno and Yobe states. So the conflict has created, actually the conflict and the insurgency has resulted, a serious humanitarian needs, and people have lost their assets, people have lost their livelihood options, access to agricultural lands and the markets, and some point in some location markets have been dysfunctionalized, and people are quite in terms of the keeping a resilient state, they are keeping a negative coping mechanisms. So many of the people, many of the people in the northeast Nigeria, they are dependent on the humanitarian assistance to meet their basic needs. So it includes, the food assistance, it includes NFI wash, and also the livelihood restorations as well. So, and there is also lack of social safety nets, and also a limited number of humanitarian actors which are working in the specific in the Yobe state where we are going to present the case study. So this is, can you please change the slide? So we will also discuss actually the decision making. So first of all, I would like to have an introduction on the SCF operations. So we had started our operations in 2018 or 2010, sorry, in different sectors. So we have been working, and we have been actually working in different sectors like nutrition, health, wash, and shelter as well. And we have also emergency, unit existing in the mission, and we are providing our supports to reach out the people who are in the need. So in terms of the social protection and the Nigeria mission, we actually started one of our CDGP project funded by DFID in 2017, and it is still ongoing, and it has a many it has actually given us a lot of decision making ideas to reach out on social protection in the conflict setting. So we also piloted one of our social protection project in 2017 in the same area, and Yobe state, it is a conflict setting area. So in terms of the, if we see the Yobe state as a state, even in the Nigeria, specific the country, there are two structures available at emergency management is agency. So one is the national emergency management agency, and second is state emergency state emergency management agency. So actually these are tied, these actually there was some low sort of the capacity in terms of the reaching out to the people who are really in the need. And so even from the both state agencies, there were very limited intervention at both federal and the state level. So, and we also find a distinct gap in terms of the assistance. So specific with the social protection, Nigeria has a federal level policy, and it was also it was also redesigned and revised in 2070 as well. But what I will discuss here, I will also focus on the specific the Yobe state. So till now, Yobe state don't have any written social protection policy. So we are all putting all efforts to make some advocacy and to involve some community CEOs and engage some government authorities to take this policy on board for the state level. So can you please just change the slide? So we will also discuss the technical design of the project in the next slide. Hello.
All right, good
Can you
afternoon,
please just go? Yeah,
good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go for it, Abdulrahman.
Yeah, okay. The Sani project is a cash plus kind of program which gives women money every month to buy nutritious food, and then it's followed up by SBCC in nutrition, IYCF, wash, and key health messages in one LGA of Yobe State. The goal is to reduce stunting morbidity and malnutrition in children under 5, because from surveys, there are a lot of negative statistics in that aspect. And the program aims to reduce those statistics and alleviate the sufferance of the people. Also, like I said, the field is funding the program. Next slide, please. The program is will end in March 2022. It's a 36 months program. We build trust with the federal government, from lesson learned from the CDGP, which is flagship and very successful. And then the precursor of the Sani program was the IMP. It was also IMP plus. There are other components about the apart from the cash transfer. And then there are also close collaboration among other INGOs operating in Yobe State. We're working together to strengthen the system of Yobe State to deliver on social protection programs and policies as well. The LGA is also the LGA has also accepted the program, and within the program, because of ownership and accountability to the people, we have a stronger complaint response mechanism where we remind people they have the right to complain, and we must have the duty to respond to their complaints. You can see on the chart by the right, different complaint entry points, and you can see 93% for the toll-free line, because I think it is convenient, it's confidential, and yeah, so it carries majority of people, beneficiaries, and community use it more than the rest of complaint entry point of staff, community volunteers, and all that. We have also built internal skills. People are happy to know more about social protection, and our staff, government stakeholders, civil society, and as well as media. Next slide, please. This much of beneficiaries were targeted in the pilot LGA. It's 5,505, and then the money is about given every month is about $10 for maximum of 33 months. That is covering 1,000 days. The transfer is given at the beginning, the first week of the month. We start disbursement of cash, and then we do that. We start that very early in the morning for protection issues, so that beneficiaries will go back home in time to take care of other children they have and other household chores. And for protection issues also, we have them under the shadow. There's water, there are toilets around disbursement centers, and we'll make sure they don't travel too much kilometers. There's also during disbursement where field staff, frontline staff look at the children of these beneficiaries. They come with them and then refer them to the stabilization centers, where that is children that are found to have some symptoms of malnutrition, severe acute malnutrition, or the other one. The perspective of government is building the capacity of CSOs and government, like I said earlier. And then there is a lot of collaborating going on in the state, which focuses on the state having its own social protection policy. And we're looking at December, but this is refreshing because even our stakeholders from the government side, they are saying December is too far, so we might have it much earlier. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. These are the challenges. In this part of the world, I think social protection is relatively new, so there is a general low understanding about it with the stakeholders, the communities, and even the civil society and the media. And then there is also no policy framework or guideline from the government side to really make government do informed decisions about social protection programs and policies as well. Another challenge is if Sani program closes in March 2022, because funding lasts until that period, we are afraid that there may not be sustainability of the cash. The state have limited resources always. And then there's also reduced humanitarian access in the country, especially in the conflict areas in the state. So in this kind of period, beneficiaries are left to their own devices because they are not receiving cash. On the left-hand side, you could see a chart where, due to counter-terrorism measures, we did not pay beneficiaries in October last year. And there was a PDM which really shows that beneficiaries really had to devise, this has affected the beneficiaries negatively, and they couldn't do a lot of things like sending children to school, health facilities, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is the negative effect of operating in a conflict area sometimes. Next slide. Opportunities are donors might be interested in social protection programs. Our beneficiaries, since it is cash plus, may continue using the knowledge they have acquired over time: early initiation, exclusive breastfeeding, wash and hygiene key messages, and so on and so forth, which will also do their children even when they are not receiving cash. You know, there's collaboration with relevant stakeholders. We hope that if Yobe State have its own social protection policy, then it will be rightly guided to prioritize budgets and allocation to vital sectors that have direct link with social protection. I think it will be good for the state. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. These are the takeaways. Sensitization of social protection policies and program through advocacy, capacity building, trainings, and all that. And we even had a learning visit to another state, to a neighboring state, Jigawa State, whose social protection system are very encouraging, strengthened more than here. And then there is also the advocacy to push the agenda of social protection agenda in Yobe State as well. The policy, nutrition sensitive lives on the social policy, because the statistics about morbidity of children, malnutrition, you know, stunting, it's very, very bad. So we think the social protection agenda should be nutrition sensitive, because to develop human capital of the country, future human capital of the country, pension capacity build on social protection, then of course implementing other policies and programs to reach out to the vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for that, Abdulrahman and Aneel, for that presentation. And again, we're seeing those same recurring themes of acceptance, building trust. And this time, you know, you spoke a bit more about the accountability and what that looks like, what your complaints and response mechanism looks like, which I know we've got a colleague from Ground Truth Solutions on this call, and they will be happy to see, you know, that we are sort of, you know, the importance of doing that sort of work, especially in something like this, especially in a conflict zone, and the work that's happening around policy. Federal policy can exist, but you know, sometimes we have to get even more context specific and looking at it in the different provinces or states, in the different areas, and roles that NGOs can take on for that. We are getting some absolutely excellent questions coming through, and we are being short on time as per usual, but I'm going to ask Larissa Pelham to come on. She is the social protection advisor for Oxfam, but in this case we have her on as a discussant from the collaborative cash delivery network. And Larissa, we are going to hope that your camera is working. If we can move to the next slide and see if we can get at least, there we go, it is working. We can see you.
It is
so
working.
Larissa, over to you, and as quickly as possible, as without missing some of the key points, if we can get through this, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Zehra. So I was given 10 minutes initially. I think I'm down to technically 2 minutes now if we're going to keep to time. So I may go a couple of minutes over, but I will try and speak, just in half the time that I was originally preparing to speak for. So first of all, thank you very much to, well, UNICEF on behalf of the Ground Bargain Sub-Working Group on Social Protection, Humanitarian Cash, for inviting the CCD to come along and co-host this webinar. I'm going to spend the next few minutes just drawing on a few points raised by the case studies and reflecting on what this means for our programming, before considering in a bit more detail what role NGOs might play in linking humanitarian response, particularly cash, and social protection in conflict settings, and exploring our added value and the challenges of this. I hasten to say, especially if I'm trying to keep to 2 minutes, which I won't, but this is certainly in no way comprehensive, but I'm just sort of trying to dip into certain areas to consider. Next slide, please. Oh, no, you can keep it on this slide, actually. Sorry, go back a slide, please. Thank you. As Zehra said, I am speaking on behalf of the Collaborative Cash Delivery Network, and specifically for the Social Protection Working Group within that. So the CCD, as Zehra said, is comprised of 15 members, which we're looking for ways to better collaborate to deliver cash and voucher assistance more effectively and efficiently to support households in humanitarian crises. Within the CCD, we established a social protection working group, recognizing that this really was going to be a critical area for collaboration for us, both in terms of delivering faster and more effectively, and helping to transition towards more sustainable support, such as in protracted crises. The working group has a common agenda, including capacity building and influencing, and we share information together, and we're exploring common work opportunities. And as far as I know, I think it is the only forum where NGOs alone can collaborate on social protection, humanitarian assistance. Okay, next slide, please. So this will be very familiar to many of you, but why is this important now? Of course, the context is that we've got increasing conflict and fragile contexts, and really the reason for looking at social protection in these contexts is that this new emerging context leads us to two requirements. We need faster and more effective and larger scale response, and we need more sustainable solutions. So the point is, can social protection help us in that to meet those two requirements? And within that, what role, if any, can NGOs play? And that's what I'll be talking about now. Okay, next slide, please. Very quickly, an alternative framework for us to look at NGO humanitarian engagement in social protection. I should say this is under review within the CCD Social Protection Working Group. It's not that we've reached a common agreement on this, but just to help us sort of think through practically how we can engage. One aspect is looking at whether we can support scaling up government interventions, i.e. pre-shock. Another way is looking at whether we can interact with social protection systems in order that as humanitarians we can deliver faster response at scale in a crisis. A third element where we can engage is around advocacy in terms of advocating for national scalable social protections under the kind of universal right to social protection, and also supporting civil society to engage in advocating for their own rights to social protection even in crises. And a fourth aspect is to think about whether in our humanitarian response, can we put in place anything that's sustainable, anything that could be the building blocks for later social assistance. And the case studies today have already referred to some of these aspects, and they kind of show that the first two and the last one are really quite fungible. There's certainly a lot of overlap between them. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just quickly to reflect on a bit of learning from the NGO, learning for NGOs on good practice in these conflict settings and how we might link with social protection, just to refer to a few elements around the approach that we might take. Some examples in terms of good practice in our approach that's highlighted in the case studies, and I'm going to run through these very fast, is we have seen that systems can be quite resilient even during crises. It can be even in the interest of power holders in a conflict to try and keep some of these systems running. So in fact, there may be more opportunities than we realize to to engage with social protection systems. And an example is that in Yemen, when the Houthis, when they were in control, even kept kind of traffic police. They maintained the traffic police in order to keep order in their areas of control, so that it is possible to explore and use them if it's appropriate. To do this, what the case studies have shown is it required leadership from the NGOs, and it required time and planning, and that has to be going on simultaneously with humanitarian response. We can't be expecting humanitarian responders to suddenly leap into designing this sort of approach. This needs to be alongside a more potentially a humanitarian approach, or prior to a crisis, or prior to a sort of peak of a crisis. And then we try and align the new design with a humanitarian, with maybe the ongoing humanitarian response. It is critical that there's flexibility in the design, and that was very clear from the case studies. And Nigeria ACF referred to how they switched their payments to be able to provide electronic and remote payments. In Yemen, they had to do on-the-spot verification of households as people were moving around. They have to just do verification at the payment site. And another aspect of this that we need, so you also need an iterative process. We need to be looking at the design, implementing, monitor that, and reviewing that. And that needs to be an ongoing process, partly as a way of maintaining flexibility in fast-changing contexts, and also as a way of building evidence. And that's a critical area that we really need to build on. Security designs are sort of self-explanatory, but maybe even more critical in engaging with social protection systems. I'm not going to go into any more detail around that. And I have a lot more to say about a kind of applying a do no harm and a conflict-sensitive programming approach. But clearly that is very critical, and some of our NGO members, CCD members, have done quite a lot of work on this, particularly World Vision and Care and NRC have worked in Eastern DRC to really look at how they can apply conflict-sensitive programming. Finally, there's a humanitarian principles, and I'm not going to go into detail other than to make one point around this. It is typically seen as kind of the red line for how humanitarians might engage in social protection. And I think we should be aware that the humanitarian principles are guiding principles only. We do in reality frequently break those principles in terms of what our funders and donors are requiring. But also this humanitarian principle approach might be one of our greatest strengths as NGOs, because they really provide the parameters to ensure that we are looking at social protection systems, potentially looking at understanding bias in the social protection systems, whether they're really fair or not. And therefore, this gives us a point in which to lobby for improvements where that's possible. Next slide, please. To look at, this is just a quick slide to look at some of the activity components that might be part of good programming in terms of humanitarian cash and social protection in a conflict setting. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into any detail on this, but other than to say that both of the case studies did reflect on the importance of strengthening systems and providing capacity building, the critical role of advocacy, the importance of accountability, and also establishing linkages for referrals. Sorry, this is where we're getting photobombed, I'm afraid. Thanks. And also the importance of documenting, sharing, and learning from our experiences. Apologies, this is what comes to try to do webinars on a day off. Next slide, please. So very quickly, again, I'm not going to go into any detail on this, but I'll more or less read through the slides. But what's a niche that NGOs offer? Firstly, is around the connectedness to communities. We are often there for the long term with communities, and we're able to build the trust, and we've got that remote reach that might be very important. And the ability to work through communities is potentially even more critical in a conflict situation. As has been referred to already, one of the advantages is that we can be very nimble, and we can adjust our programming in response to changing contexts. And has also been reflected, we are able to pilot ideas that could then be taken to scale by government or other actors. There is also the importance of collaborating, and structures like the CCD offer a real attempt to harmonise our responses in order to improve them. Another niche that we have to offer is that we're often more technically advanced, and we can actually pilot some of those technical innovations. And two other aspects in terms of NGOs engagement in humanitarian response. We're obviously not only delivering cash, we deliver multiple services in the absence of social protection in crises. And by working together on all of those, that really can be a linkage point with a kind of modelling or modelling a social protection system. And finally, NGOs have expertise and core skills which are really vital for social protection. If you think about the NGOs that are members of the CCD, we have expertise on gender, on children, on child protection, on targeting, on nutrition, and various aspects that are really critical for social protection. Next slide, please. I'll just skip over this one, but you can see quickly that really I think our role is around inclusion and targeting and ensuring access. It's around representing and speaking up for civil society. When I say us, I mean I'm talking on behalf, talking as INGOs, local NGOs, international NGOs, civil society organisations, and so on. They need to have a seat at the table. And actually, as we see more federal systems emerge, there might be more opportunity and space for us to have a seat at the table where these conversations are going on around social protection systems so that we can try and influence those. Accountability I've mentioned already, and protection and building trust. And really one of the things that this demonstrates is that there might be an opportunity for us to change existing systems, partly as we're monitoring the systems, partly as we're engaging in accountability and so on, have a good understanding of what communities are experiencing and wanting. And this might mean that we actually are able to influence emerging social protection systems in crises and conflict situations. I'm going to, next slide, please. I'll be 30 more seconds. The challenges are immense, and it should be very clear that linking between humanitarian response and social protection may not always be possible or advisable. It requires a lot of preparedness and time. All conflict contexts are very different, and it's quite difficult to sort of maybe generalize across the board. Clearly, the challenges that we have with aligning humanitarian response, humanitarian cash and social protection in an ordinary context becomes even more complex in a conflict setting. So sort of around alignment of transfers, on funding, on inflation, and so on, that all becomes a lot more complex. Next slide, please. Key points as to sort of where things need to go. We need to have technical guidance for NGOs about how we engage from preparedness to response to exit. As I said, the linkage is not a given, but there are often opportunities. Conflict sensitive programming needs to be at the very core of design of linking social protection and humanitarian response in a conflict setting, along with sort of do no harm and the humanitarian principles. I'm going to stop there, but just to say that we do have a number of questions that we would like to answer as a CCD. So maybe if on the next slide, you could just throw that up and people have a chance to read them. But I will then stop there and hand back to Zehra. Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll keep you on the webcam if you don't mind. And if I can ask everybody else, whoever has the ability to turn on their cameras, etc. And thank you, Larissa, so much for that. And it was interesting, as you were speaking, we did have Catherine from World Vision come on to ask about, do no harm and what does conflict sensitive programming look like and what do we have to think about, and how you were talking about this being so much of an iterative process as well. Like we constantly have to be going over it, looking at it. I think, one of the big key points that came out for me is, in conflict, systems can be resilient, and we have to look for those opportunities. Linkages, as you mentioned, are not always a given, but there are those opportunities that exist over there. We have, and it is a testament to the wonderful work that the NGOs have been doing in both Yemen and Nigeria around this, but I haven't seen this many questions come in for the webinar series so far. We have about 25 questions, which everybody has been able to see because we've made sure to post them out to everybody. If we can also go to the next slide, because it's just the question answer session of it. What I'm going to do is ask everybody who is able to answer. So Amar, I don't know if your webcam is actually on or not, or if you're able to turn it on, but we can start with Aneel. There's quite a few questions around coordination and cash working groups and what this looks like, and are we linking to social protection working groups that might exist, and what this sort of coordination can look like. And I think, for a conflict setting, this is quite an important point also to be bringing up. So we can start with Aneel, because I can see you and I know that you're right there. So to be able to answer the question around, what does coordination around cash, is the cash working groups, and what kind of roles are people playing within that, and also, how are you able to bring in the social protection aspect within this?
So thank you. In terms of the coordination with the cash working group in the mission, we have a functional black cash working group is functional since 2000. I think almost 3 years ago. Cash working group was functional in the Nigeria mission, and whenever we have intervention, even whenever we are going to propose to work on the proposal, we usually coordinate with the cash working group, and we also seek some technical support from them. And it is not only the cash working group, but we also liaise with the government, government ministries in terms of the, if we are planning to have a social protection, the rate, the amount we are giving, the amount we are providing to the amount we have set for the social protection in Nigeria, it is in line with the government, social safety nets. So this is also a key consideration thing in terms of the coordination, and also with the government, with both government and also with the cash working group.
Okay, and my understanding is in Nigeria, we also have OCHA, who is co-leading the cash working group, is that a correct understanding?
Yes, in Nigeria, actually, the cash working group is led by the humanitarian, the new agency, by the government, but it is co-led by the OSHA, and also technically co-led by CRS, Catholic Relief Service. Yeah.
Okay, great, wonderful. And for the Yemen side, I don't know, Amar, if you're able to give us a little bit of an understanding in terms of for the cash working group over there, and looking at ensuring somehow that social protection actors are also working within that. If you have any thoughts and reflections on what that looks like on the Yemen side. You are on mute.
Yeah.
There we go.
So for Yemen, for the caching working group, it was not there before 2011. So one of the outcomes of our pilot project that we established this group through the food security cluster, and still now it's one of the subgroups under the food security cluster, where we are managing the cash programs here in the country. So the food cluster is the umbrella of all the humanitarian interventions here, and some of the social protection actors like UNDP, also they are part of this working group, and the food security cluster, also WFP, and also they are participating in this cash program or cash working group, where also we identify the criteria of selection beneficiaries, and also the amount of cash that should be paid for the beneficiaries, criteria, guidelines, all of these things also are created there, and we are sharing this with NGOs who are working in this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Any other interventions from either Abdulrahman or Larissa on this one? That's a no then. Okay. There is quite a few questions that were also coming up around, and again, we're looking at a conflict setting. And I will just read it out from Christy Lowe, but saying that, you know, quite a few participants had questions around this topic in general. And it is about, you know, how do you assess whether it is ethically acceptable to work through government systems in the delivery of humanitarian assistance? And even if it is perceived to be ethically acceptable by the NGO, how do you assess the risk that those in need of support may be unwilling to access assistance through any entity associated with the government? This is coming back to, and you know, the questions that we have around this sort of topic is, you know, it's around the humanitarian access in a way, but also, you know, where do we choose to, how do we make those choices in terms of, you know, will we be working with the government? Will we not? Will, you know, how do we maintain our impartiality? How do we maintain our neutrality within this if we are looking at linking social protection cash and what that can look like? And for this, in terms of the design and being able to sort of give some thoughts on this, I'll open it up to Action Against Hunger first in terms of, yeah, sorry, Aneel is just looking at me like, But yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough question. This is the crux of, I mean, this is one of the things that we are, I feel like this is one of the things that we're constantly assessing and dealing with and trying to think about. I don't think there are perfect answers to any of this, but it is, you know, this is what we want to do with the webinars, is share our experiences around this and say, here's what we have learned. So also to keep it in that broad sort of thing, we're not expecting an answer or that you've done something perfectly, but, you know, what can we be learning from your experiences? Over to you, Aneel.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, in terms of, you know, working with the government, especially with the government entities and engaging them in the communities as well. So there is a lot of acceptance, you know, of the in the communities for working through with the government. Like we have been working in different sectors. We have, you know, existing MOUs with the government entities. It includes, you know, from the very bottom level, from the LGAs where we are working. So we have MOUs, and we are also, you know, local community leaders as well, you know, who are the part of the local LGAs level, local, you know, government agencies level. And apart from this, we have also some MOUs with the regional, like Maiduguri level, with in different departments. So if we can say, you know, in terms of the, you know, acceptance of the government entities in the communities, there is a high acceptance, yes. And we are working with the government in the nutrition sector. We are working with the government on, you know, agriculture and food security sector, and we have been also engaged with the Ministry of Budget and other in terms of the social protection for the advocacy and other things. So in terms of the risks, especially, you know, because all the NGOs, like we humanitarian, you know, people, we know our risk. We always, you know, develop our programs keeping in view the anticipated, you know, the risk and mitigation measures as well. So we have some sort of mitigation measures in place in the communities in terms of the community response mechanism, in terms of, you know, in-person feedback from the communities, and we usually, you know, and there is no separate, you know, any intervention. There's no any intervention where our own staff and government, you know, people are not, you know, we jointly work together. So we are engaging each other, and we are supporting actually each other. And our NGOs, like this is also our mandate to, you know, to develop, you know, our main objective is to bridge.
Oh, we seem to have lost the connection because I can see everybody else moving around. Oh, there we go. Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
Aneel. Continue.
Yeah, so, you know, we are also, you know, building some, you know, connections and building some, you know, linkages between the government and also with the communities. I can give you the example of, you know, agriculture and extension workers. So they are preaching out on the farmers for the, you know, crops and other, you know, this pesticide mechanisms as well. So this is a sort of, you know, a joint venture from the government and also the, you know, humanitarian agencies as well. So there is a high acceptance in terms of the government people. So over to you, Amar.
Yes, Amar. Because I mean, in one of the things that you also mentioned in your presentation is, you know, that you were no longer using the lists, etc. So if you can talk us through a little bit around that process and the thinking that was going into that.
Yes, actually, maybe some of you are aware about the conflict in Yemen, but in general, the local authorities here in Yemen, specifically after the escalation of the conflict in 2015, it's really so difficult to work with them. And also, it's really difficult for you also to uphold the humanitarian principles while you are working with them. However, for UNICEF, I'm talking about during this period. They have done a lot of things, to decrease the risk of related to working with the social welfare fund, and also to the influence by the local authorities related to a lot of things and demands from them. Sometimes they are suspending their distribution of cash, for example, for 1 month, 2 months, because of challenges that they are facing. For us as Oxfam, why we have stopped our intervention with them, it's also because of the beneficiary list. Because sometimes they were also influencing us in selecting some of the beneficiaries who are not really vulnerable, while we have a clear vulnerability criteria, and also the social welfare fund, they have their own vulnerability criteria, which is also according to the criteria that we have. But they are not following this criteria when it comes, to some of the list of the people they want to add.
So Amar, we actually did have a question around the criteria and the using of the lists, and what that harmonization looked like. So if you can talk us through a little bit more around that process and what the targeting looks like. I did promise the speakers on the back end of this that I wouldn't get into the nitty-gritty, but there is quite a few questions around, I think it was an amazing approach that Oxfam took back in, did we say it was 2016, to be able to use the social welfare fund lists and to build trust in those lists and, really sort of kickstart that process. But this is where our sticking point ends up being, like, does the humanitarian list fit with the social protection list of the government, and what this looks like and how to sort of mitigate through that process. So if you can just give us a little bit, I'm aware we've got about 5 minutes left, but yeah, if we can get a little bit around that, I think that would be quite interesting for everybody.
Okay, thank you. So during 2011 until 2013, as I said, the situation here in Yemen, there was a food security crisis in the country in some of the locations, and at the same time, because of lack of fund comes to Yemen, also to the social welfare fund. So our criteria, it was focusing on the most vulnerable people who are affected from this food crisis, and also the political situation and the security situation in the country. So we were focusing on the most vulnerable people, while the social welfare fund criteria also focusing on the most vulnerable people. Like, they were targeting elderly people, they were targeting women, they were targeting people with disabilities, also they were targeting orphans or children, orphans. So also the people who also has no go or has no income, also they were also targeted by the social welfare fund. So we mixed our criteria with them, and we ensure that we are also supporting those people. Then also we had included the IDPs, as I said before. IDPs were not like a main category for the social welfare fund. But they were included as a most vulnerable people affected by the conflict or the clashes that the war was between Houthis and the government before. It was started from 2006 until 2010. So there was several clashes between the government and the Houthis in Saada governorate, which led to the displacement from Saada to Hajjah. So all of those people were also targeted in Hajjah, where we scale up, and we received also fund after 2011. So due to what we have done, then we received some fund from the donors, because they were trusting what we are doing. So they supported us to reach to more vulnerable people also in Hajjah. However, there was some challenges related, for working mechanism with the local authorities at that time, but it was better than the situation now. So the situation now is more complicated and difficult. However, UNICEF is still working with them to support people here in Yemen.
Okay, thank you for that. There really was quite a few questions around, what does the targeting work like, etc. I'd like to just reassure all the attendees that, we will take all 27, or yes, as of right now, we've got 27 questions. Some of them we have been able to answer. We will pass them on to the different panelists to be able to get you those answers. You'll be able to find the questions answered in writing, along with the summary of the blog post. But I'd like to be able to just give all our speakers, we will go a minute over time, and that's okay. We started 3 minutes late. So just to give everybody a chance, if there are any final thoughts or words that you might have to share with the close to 100 attendees that we have had over the webinar. So I'll start with those people that we cannot see, which is Abdulrahman. If there is anything that you would like to add on the topic.
Yeah, but maybe will you allow me to address a question? Yeah.
No, I'm giving you like 10 seconds to give us your last thoughts.
Okay. Somebody asked an important question: what our collaboration or linkages with the National Social Safety Office in Abuja and the National Cash Transfer Office? Yeah, what we're doing, which did not come in the presentation, is that there are very, very low numbers of the poor and vulnerable registered in the National Social Register. So part of the advocacy we're doing is to encourage the government to fast track this process, because this is a state coming out of insurgency. The resilience is still very low. So if people could get cash transfer from the federal government, because you register people and put on the platform, then they are mined from there and then given cash transfer. So as I speak, UB State have less than 25,000 on the social register, and I think only 11,000 are benefiting from the federal government cash transfer. But if you look at Zamfara, have over 200,000 on the register. Jigawa have about 150,000 on the register. So what we're doing is, we told the House of Assembly when we went for a courtesy call 2 weeks ago to really call the SOCO, that is the State Office Coordinating Unit of the NASCO, to ask them what are the challenges. I know World Bank is supporting to also register more on the social register, as well as the BRICS consortium, Save the Children, Mexico, and Kopi. So this is part of what we are doing also in the advocacy level.
Thank you so much. And that, again, coming back to that advocacy, social registers or social protection information management systems, another really key important point. So really great to hear, the INGO perspective and trying to fast track people through that. Aneel, any last thoughts from you before we log off? It could be a no. So yes, we'll put it at a no. Abdulrahman, if you can please just mute yourself. Amar, any last thoughts?
Okay, please.
I think focusing only on providing cash directly to the beneficiaries as an approach for social protection is not enough. So we need to focus more on also how to strengthen the existing social protection system. Like, for example, for people with disabilities here in Yemen, there was a very, very good structure where they have access to all services related to basic needs, education, rehabilitation, health, everything. But due to the conflict, it's not functioning like, it's only 20% with their resources. So we need also to focus how to support this mechanism.
Absolutely, because cash is just a tool, not a program. Larissa, your last thoughts. Again, thank you so much to the CCD for co-hosting, but yes, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I'm just going to use this time to give 2 quick points that I haven't said so far, and one relates to a question that was thankfully raised already from the audience. Firstly, that one of the critical things that I think as NGOs we need to be considerate of in terms of conflict is in conflict situations and all situations in terms of people living with disability. And one of our critical areas that NGOs specifically can support us in identifying those people that are living with disability and how their needs can really be met in conflict situations, and that really links to a kind of social protection approach more generally. I think that's really vital. I think that's something that on the whole as NGOs we're not particularly good at, although of course there are some specialist NGOs that really do work on that, and I think we're going to have to be bringing that a lot more into our programming going forward. And the other thing I was going to say was just around building evidence. I mean, it's a pretty dull comment, but it is so critical. That might mean partnering up with organizations that can kind of do the evidence building alongside humanitarian and NGOs doing the operations. So it's not seen as a sort of part of the regular programming, but it is, because it's quite hard to get that going in kind of the spur of the moment to bring that into design. That's a very hard thing to start doing. But but building evidence is so vital for us to kind of really reinforce what our role is, to show where we're having the added value. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists. I mean, really, the interest that we are getting out of this topic with all the questions and everything is absolutely incredible. It's a webinar of 91 minutes, which is okay. We went 1 minute over, and please do look out for and join us on our next webinar, which we will be having on Thursday, the 16th of April. We are looking, and when I say we, I mean the Grand Bargain subgroup, if you have ideas on topics or you've got speakers, if you would like to co-host and co-present with us, absolutely get in touch. We will be sending out a summary and a Q&A, and again, a massive thank you to the CCD for all the work you guys have put into ACF, or Action Against Hunger, and Oxfam for your presentations, and we will see you next time, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.